Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hey folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Been a week since we had the last time we chat, and lots been happening. So we're going to have a very busy programme. Whether we get everything in or not, I do not know, or whether we overrun. If Techie lets us, we will. We'll see how it goes. But I am joined by my three musketeers today. Firstly, of course, over there in Seoul in Korea, our Phil. Mr. Boswell, how are we?
Good, in a tea house. Very twee, full of people talking and having tea, oddly enough. So there's a wee bit of background noise, apologies. But you won't understand what they're saying unless you speak Korean.
Sounds very middle class, Mr. Boswell.
It is. That as soon as they suss me out about my ear, I don't know. It's going to be soon.
Do you lift your pinky in Korea when you're drinking your tea?
No.
And also, from up there in Clackmannanshire, our Eva.
Hi,
Eva, my dear friend, how are you?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
I love your scarf.
I think
you'll have to leave. You'll have to leave. I'm sorry. You'll have to leave.
My appearance speaks for itself today.
Well done, indeed. And how have you been? You been keeping well?
Yeah, very busy. Obviously, a lot going on this week, and looking forward to
sure.
next week too.
Without further ado, my dear friend from the borders there, down in Jedburgh, wearing her new Prism gear. There you go, Through a Scottish Prism gear. Available at all good retail. No, it's not actually. It's only available for us. Wearing it there. Show that badge there, the old badge there on your polo shirt. See it there, folks? Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely. Quality, John, quality. These are good, you know. I'll do my Del Boy. French red, that you died.
Well, it's
plus packaging posting. There you go.
It's $top quality. You wouldn't get this on a market stall in Peckham.
Not at all. You'd be lucky to get it in Harrods. You'd be very lucky to get it in Harrods. Anyway, my dear friends, here we are. Every week we come on here fighting for Scottish nationalism and for the independence of our country. And we all know why we're here, but to me there was something that happened this week that really, really got to me. Maybe it's just because I'm just back from Dubai and seeing my latest wee grandbaba, and knowing that she's safe and well, and the terrible, tragic story of young Awab down there in Rochdale. Techie, can you put up the picture of that wee darling? Wee Awab Ishak, 2 years of age, ladies and gentlemen. The headline tells you, mould in a flat caused this young boy of 2 to die. We live in allegedly the fifth largest country in the world. The unionists tell us how fantastic it is. And throughout the country, not just, and this is happening in Scotland as well, believe you me, but there's a wee darling baby boy of 2, life taken from him because of poverty, because of lack of investment, because they're putting their money into the Panama and the Cayman Islands, and because they're divvying up to their good pals, and they're keeping money away from the poor and the disadvantaged in our society. And that, more than anything, is why I'm here. And I think my dear friends here with me will be similar. Phil, did you see the story? Did it twang your heart? You're on mute, my friend. You're muted.
Yeah, of course, and it's why we do. It's why we are leaning towards socialism. Socialism saves lives. People who do, this is industrial capitalism. It's an absolute disgrace. And I know the girls will speak great detail on it, but I look regularly at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation figures because it was Quaker in origin and might have resisted the takeover of our institutions by those who would corrupt and lie to us, such as those that are doing to what they did to poor wee Awab. The Joseph Rowntree latest statistics, the ones I last saw, more than 1 in 5 of the UK population are in poverty, 14.5 million people. 8.1 middle working age adults, and it depends on the metrics you use. 4.3 million are children. 4.3 million children and 2.1 million pensioners. So when we use the term poverty, they use the relative poverty rate after housing costs to measure. There's other ways of doing it. You'll see different figures, but child poverty continues to rise. The latest data tells that almost 1 in 3 children in the UK are in poverty. Almost 1 in 3.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly half of the children in lone parent families live in poverty, and compared with 1 in 4 in those in families where there's a couple. And that's the destruction of family values that's enabling this, which a
And these
lot
are
of this.
these are not layabouts. These are people who probably have 2 jobs
Yeah,
each.
they're working. Yeah, it's horrific. And of the working age adults, lone parents are by far the most likely of any family type to be struggling with poverty. And that's cultural as well and societal. We look at pensioners; it's also really bad. So no, it's children of the highest poverty rates throughout the last 25 years. I mean, it's 25
Shocking.
years ago, a third of the children lived in poverty. It's horrific right now. Absolutely horrific.
Oh, you've frozen there. Well, Eva, you saw there's a clip doing the rounds in social media of Brian Cox who's doing a documentary, and you could see he was visibly, not playing to the camera, but visibly hurt, shaken, angry at the poverty he was seeing in his hometown of Dundee. It's endemic in Scotland as well. I know you concentrate a lot on the poverty and equality. It is one of the main reasons why we all have the politics we have, and there's only one way to end it.
Well, the issue for all of us here is that we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that poverty is the greatest driver of inequality. And we know that those who live in poverty suffer the worst outcomes in a lifelong context.
Mm-hmm.
And we know from Purwe Awab Ishak's experience and his horrible, untimely, premature death that poverty undoubtedly kills. And what we see in this example is only Tory policies and the policies of unionism writ large. Mm-hmm. You know, the Housing Association boss, who has ultimate responsibility for this wee lad's death, is a man called Gareth Swarbrick. I want him to be famous. His salary's 170 grand and he hasn't yet offered his resignation. He is ultimately responsible for that wee boy's death and for the poor conditions within which that family and very many other families lived. But that problem is not restricted to England by any stretch of the imagination. No. There is a regular reports from the Scottish Housing Conditions Survey. The most recent one I could find, I think, was published last year, but the statistics there are for the previous years, 2017 to 2019 or so. And in Scotland, there are some local authority areas where damp housing or housing affected by condensation rises to as much as 6% of the housing stock. So I would imagine, and this is a guess, but it's not just a random guess, I would imagine that we'll be hearing soon that housing conditions between 2020 and now have in fact worsened, and we'll be told that the problem is the pandemic and Brexit and the economy, when in fact it's a question of priorities. We know that generally in Scotland, life expectancy is beginning to reduce. We know that drug deaths are far more prevalent in areas where people are poor. We know that deaths as the result of addictions to alcohol are far higher. And we know that suicide is far more prevalent. So if we needed any more evidence of it, the fact of the matter remains that Scotland's greatest problem is poverty. It's man-made and it's political, and it will only change with dramatic policies, which we are not seeing with the SNP government. We're seeing sticking plasters from them. We've got, Yvonne's favourite, the baby box. We've got some very limited increases in the Scottish child payment. What we don't yet have, but we should have, is universal basic income, so that whether you're a pensioner or you're working or you're bringing up a family, you've got a guaranteed income, and what's coming into your house is enough to cover what's going back out again, as opposed to the other way around. So we need courageous politicians, people of principle, and people who are prepared to say enough is enough. In relation to child deaths particularly, Roddy, I would go back to, I think it was 2015, and we'll all remember wee Alan Kurdi, the wee lad from Syria who drowned with his, with his family trying to flee. Now, that wee boy's image was on the front page. It was front page news. It was all over the media for long enough. It was only 7 years ago, though. And what have we got now? We've got an English Secretary of State and a Home Office talking in terms of turning people away and arguing about who it is, whether it's the French or the English or the British, who should be rescuing people who are on dinghies in the Channel. It seems to me that those in positions of power forgot about Alan Kurdi. I don't want them to forget about Awab Ishak and his family. It is high time that the priorities of the UK and of Scotland changed for once and for all. And I hope this wee lad's death can contribute to the restoration of some principle in politics.
And decency. Yvonne, I mean, all of us thinking that we'd left poverty behind. I go back to what I said in my wee introduction. This is supposed to, the UK is supposed to be the 5th or 6th largest country, richest country in the world. And yet we are, and lots of other wee darlings. And as we head towards Christmas, and Christmas, there's a lot of wee darlings are going to be hungry, never mind getting a present in Christmas. And it's just so wrong. And as Eva's alluded to, it's man-made.
Well, it is, but it's not poverty that kills, it's politics. And we have to look at the politicians who roll out these policies that lead to shocking deaths like Alan Kurdi, the 2-year-old Syrian boy who was pulled out of the water dead back in 2015. And now we've got young Awab from Rochdale. I have a really uncomfortable feeling if those little boys had blonde hair and blue eyes and white skin, it wouldn't have happened. And unfortunately, our attitude, and it is our attitude, and it is politics that is killing.
It might have happened once, but it wouldn't happen twice, Yvonne. If you had blonde hair and blue eyes, it would happen once. They wouldn't allow it to happen twice.
There are children that are still drowning in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Or, the fish are feeding off hundreds of bodies of dead refugees floating in the water of the Mediterranean. And it's the 21st century. Yep. And what are the headlines taken up by? Because you can't get a pint of lager in Doha in Qatar for the World Cup. That's what is making people angry at the moment. And I just think, we've all got to accept some form of responsibility. We've just had the by-election results in the Lynn ward, and that made me so angry, not because our side or the Alba candidate, the excellent Alba candidate that we had. I'm not angry because she didn't win. She gave it her best shot. I'm angry because voter turnout was below 25%.
Mm-hmm.
People can't be bothered. And if people can't be bothered to go out and vote, then you'll get the flotsam and jetsam coming in that we've got sitting in Westminster. So in some ways, there's a saying that you get the government that you deserve.
But I think a lot of these people don't vote is because they've lost hope. They've lost faith in the politicians. I wouldn't so much blame the ones that stay at home. I'd blame the politicians and the media for not giving people a reason to want to go out and vote, for not giving people the truth behind the stories, by omitting, as I wrote in a blog recently about omissions is the biggest crime of our media. It's not the lies they tell you, which they do some, but it's what they don't tell the people. That's their biggest crime. But it brings us on, Phil. Time's cracking on, and I want to move on to so many topics. And one of them is the budget. Because we had a chance here to do something about poverty. We didn't. It was a kind of nothing budget. But for me, the one thing that came out of it, Phil, was that, skint Scotland, subsidised Scotland, worthless oil running out. They're going to take 80 billion to cover their black hole in England. There you go. The UK oil industry is 80 billion. But of course, become 2024 election, the oil will have run out or be running out or be too cheap or not be the right oil, won't it?
Aye, absolutely, always the case. I mean, as I've pointed out many times, this is a windfall tax. This isn't the regular taxation or a fair taxation system, and it's a con. And not for the oil and gas companies and energy companies, they end up paying less than a fair system would require. But for the people, we're the ones that are getting conned. Instead of taxing everyone properly, they make a show of it, charging occasional tax charges instead of regular steady charges that businesses can adjust for and reckon with, and the people actually benefit. Together, these measures, was it 14 billion pounds next year, and then 55 billion between up to 2028. Compare that to Norway, with its $1.2 trillion sovereign wealth fund for the people, the largest in the world. It's set to increase tax on energy by 10 billion in 2023. You check out Energy Facta in Norway for its petroleum tax system, along with the government's total net cash flow. I mean, the net cash flow for the petroleum industry in Norway is estimated at around $117 billion per year in 2022 and $138 billion in 2023. So don't be duped by the delta here. Now, currently we're producing about half of what Norway produces, but there's no excuse we could do. I mean, I work for Statoil, right? And since we're not even halfway through the oil and gas, I know that without, with plenty more work, more West Coast oil and gas in the massive rock oil basin, not even counting the mineral wealth such as fire ice, people need to talk about this. We need to know. We can have a wealth fund for the people to wipe out poverty in Scotland, the disgrace that it is. There's no excuse. Fire ice alone is worth a mention. It's methane hydrate, okay? Japanese developed it. Chinese are now doing it in large quantities, and it's probably the most plentiful hydrocarbon on Earth, and we know what it is. Why? Because when we drill, that destabilizes the drilling. That when you do the directional drilling, fire ice is basically crystallized methane trapped in ice crystals, and any heat. It's only in crystal form because of the pressure and the depth. Anyway, the bottom line is, there's so much wealth out there we should be using responsibly, removing it and giving it to the people that own it, because it's the Scottish sovereign people that own this wealth, and we would be able to help remove poverty once and for all. And then the inflation's up 11.1%.
Well, I was just coming to that. I was going to say, Yvonne, we've got inflation running at 11.1%. Now, we know that inflation's terrible for those at the bottom of as most things are, at the bottom of the pile, an 11.1 inflation, and it's never right. When you're seeing a packet of Lord-Pack at £8, you think it's going to be a lot more than 11% of a rise. But it's the people at the bottom. The people at the top, they make more money. They get wealthier with a higher inflation. It's a vicious circle, and it's always the poorest in society that pay the price, Eva. This budget does nothing to help them.
This budget does nothing to help them, and it underlines and underscores yet again the desperately urgent need for Scottish independence, where we use our own resources to our benefit and we state what our priorities are. We're not beholden to the priorities of those in Westminster, and we know perfectly well that they are, in effect, corporate interests and the interests of the privileged few who are in power or work in the puppets from behind the scenes. I cannot for the life of me understand why the Scottish Government, in effect, took the foot off the gas in relation to the drive towards independence, but they most certainly have. We're sitting twiddling our thumbs now, waiting for the decision of the Supreme Court next week, when what ought to have been happening is we should have been full steam ahead since at least the Scottish parliamentary election last year. We could have been independent by now had we had a constitutional convention as promised, and had we had a concerted campaign where we had confident politicians who were prepared to stand up and be counted and make demands on behalf of Scotland and actually have the courage of their convictions and fulfil the mandates on which they were elected. People in Scotland who are hungry and who are cold and who can't pay the bills can blame Westminster all they want, but the reality is the Scottish Government was elected to get us out of there. Our SNP MPs at Westminster were elected to get us out of there, and that's what they should damn well be doing now. Every day from now till kingdom come, get us out of there. The quicker the better. My MP and my MSP are having an event next Friday in the Town Hall in Alloa. I would invite everybody in Clackmannanshire to get along there. They're going to get some support service advice from Keith Brown and John Nicholson about how to cope with the cost of living crisis. They'll be told where to get money, where to get vouchers, where to go for food, where to go for help. I would like to tell Keith Brown and John Nicholson where to go. It's to get their backsides in gear and get this country independent, and then we wouldn't be needing to be sending folk begging to food banks or anywhere else. They would be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
Yvonne, John Swinney's come out and said that there's no more money for mitigation. Now, I wrote a blog a while ago, and I still stand by it, saying that maybe we were doing too much mitigation and we were hiding behind mitigation, and that we should have, said to the people, if you want to get it better, here's what we've got to do. And it's what you say, get angry, get mad.
Yeah, that's, I really do feel anger when we have children drowning in the Mediterranean, little boys, babies dying because of mould in social housing. And Eva, if you do go along and challenge that useless duo of Nicholson and Brown, I'll pay to get a ringside seat, because that will certainly be worth saying. Swinney, I just despair every time he opens his mouth. It's just so predictable. As you said before, we're living in one of the richest countries in the world.
Uh-huh.
The biggest oil companies announced their profits this month, and I think it was £150 billion worth of profits that have largely been caused by Russia's war on Ukraine, which has pushed up the energy prices. But the likes of Shell are reporting obscene profits in excess of 50-60 billion pounds.
A quarter. A quarter.
For a quarter, yeah. And Chevron and ExxonMobil, they're expected to be hitting the £70 billion mark if they haven't announced them already. BP next week is expected to break the £20 billion mark. And we have babies drowning and dying, and poverty and food banks. And so, as I say, whenever John Swinney opens his mouth, I just think, oh God, I just want to switch off the TV. We have to get angry. We really do have to get angry before there are more babies dying because of the poverty caused through political policies. And he was right. The goal of independence is getting further and further away, although the Supreme Court is coming out with an announcement next week.
Wednesday.
And in Wednesday, is it? And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they actually say, yeah, go and have your referendum, because I think that they'll wrap it up in such a way that it will be absolutely meaningless. And if we can't get people to turn out and vote in for local politicians, I'm not so sure we'll be able to get them to turn out and vote for independence, because people are not angry enough.
Or they're too desperate. They're full of despair. Phil, we have got this Supreme Court decision on the 23rd. Now, I'm of the opinion, as I think we all are, that it will actually not be favourable, and that they'll be just get back in your box, jockos. Westminster is sovereign. But I want to do an advert, and I did a blog yesterday promoting that Time for Scotland is an organisation run by, among others, Leslie Ruddock, and they've got 8 demonstrations on the night of the day of the decision, the judgment, and the biggest one is to be at Holyrood, starting at 5:30 to 7:30. And Techie, I wonder if you could run the addresses along the bottom there of all the other locations and where they'll be. So I've encouraged people to go to these. Now, I know a lot of people say, I'm not going to go with them because there's that one there and that person, this. But this is about Scotland. This is not about individuals. This is not an SNP event. This is not an AIM event. This is not an ALAPA event. This is for Scotland. This is, and I think it's the right thing to do is for as many people as possible to turn up at these events to send a message to both Bute House and to number 10 Downing Street.
Correct. It sends a message to the SNP that when you do talk about independence, when you do face that direction, that you will find the people behind you. In spite of the reservations that we have. I mean, Tommy Sheridan nailed it when he was last with us. The Scottish Government, a subsidiary of the governmental arm of the British institution, has asked the Supreme Court, the legal arm of the British institution, if the Scots can have a legal vote to break away from the UK government, the main governmental arm of the British constitutional institution. So what's the point? It will be a no unless it's a trap, and that's the thing we fear most. So no, we need to be seen and we need to be heard, and that means being outside and breach and work against that ban on standing up and shouting for your rights outside the Scottish Parliament and tell the SNP exactly what they should be doing. We need a real and workable plan from them, and they need to listen to what we've been saying, and they need to listen to what is being said and watch what's being done. We need to watch what the SNP are doing. What have they done since they announced this?
Well,
is anyone taken in by this con game? Sadly, yes, but our jolly tester politician, what is the plan? Tommy Shepherd, who I'm fond of as a person, was very weak on this. He said, if they say yes, we'll have a referendum. If they say no, the fight goes on. What fight, Tommy? I see no fight from SNP other than the fight for the biggest, comfiest slipper among all MPs and MSPs, including SNP.
It's Phil's right again there, Eva. While they're doing it, what the SNP doing now is our equalities person on here. They're pushing through their GRR bill. They're not sitting there discussing. Now we're 10 months away from, or 11 months away from our alleged referendum. And I remember what it was like in 2013, 11 months out. It was a hive of activity. But are the SNP discussing borders, how they're going to get back into the EU, currency, how we're going to transition into an independent country? No, they're not. They're discussing GRR, 155 amendments put through, most of them kicked into the long grass, Eva. Their priorities are not the priorities of independence, are they?
I think what we see on almost every day now at Holyrood is a government and at times a parliament who are completely out of touch with what the people of the country want and what they were actually elected to do. The GRR bill is just another example of that. We know that the most dangerous aspect of that and the most controversial aspect is the self-identification issue. That was in nobody's manifesto, and it's the thing that is most divisive. When the people of Scotland understand what self-identification means, they are very, very much against it by a vast majority. And it obviously causes difficulties elsewhere because there are some places where self-ID is already in practice. We know in particular that this is something that's highly controversial and positively dangerous in the context of prisons. So the trouble for the Scottish Government is that they are out of touch. What they ought to be doing is pausing everything that's controversial, not publicly supported, and looking at what the priorities should be in a time where we are in recession officially. And so instead of people spending, endless days and weeks debating stuff that doesn't really advance life for anybody very much, what they should be doing is creating an international presence in the context of preparing a case for the UN. They should be looking at reconstituting the Constitutional Convention, as we've already said, and they should be speaking positively, warmly and courageously to everybody in Scotland about what the benefits of independence are. There should be a national drive to get every adult on the electoral register and to educate people about what elections are, what politics is, and why it is that we've got a universal franchise. That should be happening. It is part of the, if you like, the duty of a democratically elected government is to make sure that their population and their electorate are actually educated and understand what politics means and why you have a government and why you elect politicians. So, as has been said already, I think by Yvonne, people need something to give them hope. they need to understand that their vote can change their own life as well as the lives and the destinies of other people. And these are all the areas where the current government and all the politicians currently sitting in Holyrood, and most of them in Westminster, are failing constantly to deliver something worth having and to give people the understanding that they can change their own futures. That's what it's about. That's where we need an inspirational leader, not somebody who reads a pre-prepared speech or has a few mantras to kick in now and again.
But
With mandates and inaction.
Yeah, but this is it, everyone. Eva's right. Let's give the people some hope. Gender reform doesn't give people hope. I don't see what that does to advance the cause. We've had the discussions on here often enough. But the bit in there that really got me was Scarfgate. Now, I know there's been an apology made to the two ladies that were removed. But the fact of the matter is that they were removed in the first place is indicative of how this whole debate, and there's been no debate, I use that word loosely, has been carried out. The demonisation of women, the demonisation of people who show any suffragette colours, demonisation of women who stand up for the rights and the protection of children and safeguarding. And that all found itself in these two women being ejected from Holyrood.
Yeah, and while a team of politicians sporting rainbow colours were allowed in to Holyrood, and we still haven't been told who was responsible, who made the specific order, and it would be down to one individual, but we don't know yet who that individual is. But they brought the whole of Holyrood into a laughing stock. And this is the trouble. Nobody is taking the Scottish Parliament seriously. The word got out about that within hours. And of course, we had this half-hearted apology that people had been asked to leave the chamber because they were wearing, I think one was wearing a scarf similar to the one that Eva's wearing now. And the very next day in Westminster, Joanna Cherry had the same style scarf on, and she stood up and spoke loud and proud. And as much as we criticise the Westminster Parliament, there was none of this Toy Town stuff saying sit down, remove your colours, and none of that. And I just don't know, this chips away at people's confidence, and it makes a mockery of Scottish politics. And I'm just not in a good place this week, really.
Well, it is, but they used the security guard, Phil, used the Nuremberg defence. I was only carrying out orders. But as Yvonne said, we don't know whose orders he was carrying out. And that's what we do need to know. Because the other thing that came across was there was an amendment put in by Russell Finlay, a Tory MSP, that said that sex offenders should not be granted a GRC because of their offence. But that was rejected. How the heck did that happen?
This is traitorous. This is why we've got to fight. We know who's in charge. We know who calls the shots and sets the tone and dictates what the philosophy and policy is. This is traitorous. And we saw contrasting pictures. Did you remember seeing it, Nicola, in suffragette colours? And I and the rest of the 56 were there with her at an event at the Emmeline Pankhurst sculpture in the gardens just south of the Palace of Westminster, where all the talk was of what had been done for women, and the purple, white and green were well represented. Now it's illegal? Really? This is madness. She and the woke cabal are destroying our current chances of Indy, not enabling it, which is why she and the rest of these chancellors need to shift. And the GRA madness, it's like the Ricky Gervais sketch on trans. Please watch it. He just repeats back to the trans people their own arguments, and we, the majority, see it for how ridiculous it is. And he feels like we do. We sympathise with those going through this and would support the adult making such a transition. Though for me, getting people out of poverty is much, much, much more important.
Yes.
It's the self-ID. It's the self-ID that's the problem, and the erosion of the hard-fought rights for women and girls that I would be prepared to fight anyone on as a father.
Absolutely. The one that gets to a couple of things, Eva, but the first one I'd like to ask you two questions. But the first one, what Shona Robertson turned around and said they rejected this amendment, but because they would just get the sex offenders would have to inform the police voluntarily that they were going to do this process now. I'm not a psychologist or a social worker or a policeman or anything, but it strikes me as that these people are some of the most sexual offenders, not trans, but sexual offenders are some of the most sneaky people going, there's not a chance in hell they're voluntarily going to go and give that advice to the police, are they?
You see, this just illustrates completely the utter lack of joined up thinking on the part of the Scottish Government. They have got multiple departments of statisticians who double check who has done what to whom and where and when, and they keep records on everybody. There are figures available annually and broken down into area and type of offence that tell you where people have breached orders. And there are more than 500 sex offenders who changed address, for example, without prior permission or without giving notice to the police. There are no circumstances on the planet where a convicted sex offender will go to the police in advance of doing something that is different or unusual or whatever, if they're at risk of being caught. So the naivety is beyond belief. It's off the scale. It's a wee bit akin to me deciding I'm going to go and rob a bank next week, so I'll phone the bank in advance and let them know. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So, yes, incredibly pathetic. And I think what was probably the most disappointing, actually, out of the performance of the minister was the fact that she had pre-prepared responses in relation to every amendment, and she just sat there, she read her preamble, they had a wee pretend debate, she read her answer, and the answers would have been the same no matter what was said, because the answers were obviously written in advance, and she had a fair idea of what was going to be said, but she was not able at any turn to think out of the box, to lift her head up, to look in the eye of the people she was debating with. She's not got the courage of her own convictions. No. She's sitting there going through the motions because that's what the First Minister requires her to do. Yeah. What she needs to do, though, is have a surgery in Dundee, in her constituency, and listen to the men and women in her constituency who say they will never vote for her again because she's not listening to their very valid concerns about the safety of women and girls and the desperate need to protect single-sex spaces and services.
It reminded me of the Scotland Act, Eva, where all the great amendments that we put forward, now you were there, Phil, putting some of these amendments there, they were just knocked back. Didn't matter what you say. You know, if it's we can get rid of the national debt for England as well if you put this amendment in. No, reject. And that's exactly what the SNP are doing. But what got me this week, really, really got me, now you're a lawyer, or legal eagle on here, is the name, I should just probably say the name, Kate Dolatowski, who is a male with penis and testicles who's declared himself a woman. Now, he was in Pullman jail. He viciously assaulted a fellow inmate for comments made. I don't know, maybe about I don't know what it was about, but he made a vicious assault. So the resulting punishment for this man who assaulted another, that's the man, was to send him to Cortonville, the women's prison. Yeah, I need you to explain that one to me because I'm lost, Eva, that anyone can think that is a solution. I'd have sent him to Peterhead and put him in solitary confinement.
Right. This is where it's really important to be word perfect when you quote somebody. So here's a quote for you. This is from James Morton, who works for the Scottish Government and consults widely with the Scottish Government and advises them on matters of this nature. He assisted in preparing the policy on transgender guidance within prisons, and he actually remarked on it as follows. We strategised that by working intensively with Scottish Prison Service to support them to include trans women as women on a self-identifying basis within very challenging circumstances, we would be able to ensure that all other public services should be able to do likewise. In other words, female prisoners and female staff in female prisons were the canaries in the coal mine for this transgender advice, which is now permeating right through Scottish public service. So what happened with Katie Dolitovsky was he was in prison because he had been convicted of offences of indecency against children.
10 and 12-year-old.
One in particular, an offence committed in the toilet of a supermarket in Fife. So he was serving a sentence in Pullman, and he was in the male part of the prison. He attacked a male inmate. He subsequently finished his sentence, was at liberty, was living in Fife, and without giving permission, or seeking permission rather, moved to live in Leeds, where he stayed in a women's aid refuge for several weeks as a fully intact male. So the women's aid refuge, I think, are backsliding from that and letting on that they weren't really sure what was going on. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it was abundantly clear to the staff there that they were housing a man with a criminal record beside women and children. So Mr. Dolitovsky left Leeds and came back to Fife, was lifted for having breached the orders in relation to his place of residence, subsequently appeared at court and appeared in connection with those issues about changing address without permission, and also had to appear on the charge relating to the earlier assault which had occurred in Pullman. So when he appeared in court, it was explained to the sheriff that the Pullman incident, as you said, Roddy, arose from comment being made to him because he was troubled when he'd been in Pullman that he was in a male, not a female part of the establishment. So because he's now self-identifying as female, he's been sent to Corrington Vale, a women's prison, where he is housed in a prison beside women. He doesn't have a GRC as far as I know. He remains an intact, full-bodied male person. But I think what you and I and the rest of the world, and most especially the female prisoners, many of whom are traumatised, who do not want men in their spaces, and the female prison officers are all supposed to become sex blind. We're supposed to forget that he's a man because he wants to be known as a woman. And so his feelings trump the legal rights of the women prisoners to not be subjected under the UN conventions and all the international rules, with not to be subjected to cruel, inhumane or degrading punishment. In my book, and I think in the book of everybody here and everybody watching and listening, it is cruel, inhuman and degrading punishment to require mixed sex prisons, particularly where this man is a violent convicted offender. So that's what's going on. That's what the Scottish Government are permitting. Keith Brown will tell you it's not up to him, it's up to the Scottish Prison Service. He will claim that there's been a risk assessment done. In my view, prisons should be single sex. There's no two ways about it. If there needs to be a unit for transgender prisoners, so be it. Provide them with a unit for themselves. They should not ever, ever should male prisoners be housed with females. Never.
No, I agree. I think we all agree. I'll come to you first, Yvonne, because I can see Angry Phil's coming to join us shortly. I can see him getting angrier and angrier as Eva was explaining what was going on there. So I'm going to give him a few seconds to calm down. But he was right. We need, we have disabled toilets. Why can't we have trans toilets? Why can't we have trans prisons for them or separate units for them? Why should they be allowed to go in beside women? Especially with genitalia. If they've got no genitalia, I would say, okay, there's an argument for that. But with their genitalia in place, they should not be allowed anywhere near women, should they?
Well, it's because of politicians like Shona Robertson that people are turned off from politics. This is, yet another symptom of why there is so much disinterest in politics, because, her head must be zipped up at the back if she thinks that a sexual predator in a woman's prison isn't like letting the fox into the hen coop. Really? And I can't find the words, and I'm a journalist and words are my business, but that sort of political decision making, it just defies belief. And it also treats the most vulnerable women in our society, which are usually women prisoners, it's treating them like lab rats to allow these predatory men into prisons. And if they continue down this path, they are going to turn Scotland into a tourism destination for predators men.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the net effect of their bonkers policy decision making. And, you know, what is it going to take? Is it going to take the equivalent of a child drowning in the Mediterranean or a child dying in a mouldy flat? What is it going to take the Scottish government to realise that they are betraying women on a wholesale industrial scale? It's really, it's making me angry, and I can imagine that Phil is going to wreak havoc in that tea room in Seoul any minute now.
I can see he's champing at the bit. Phil, let me lead you into it simply. We have a Trans Remembrance Week, not a day. There's a Trans Remembrance Week for all those trans people who do it. And I did some research. I know you do a lot of research as well, but we found that it's on average one trans person is murdered per year. Whereas in 2020, the last numbers available, 110 women in the UK were murdered by men, be it their partner or a man. We don't have a week's Remembrance Women's Week. We're getting women who are losing their rights. And to sum it up, just before you let loose, we know her Ash 49, who we know had a chat to us at our Stirling gig. She's registered blind. Her dog, she was in Dundee, and there's a crossing, but they painted it in the trans colours. And the dog, of course, is not trained to do that and refused to cross the road. She wrote to the council complaining, and she became subject to a pile-in. And our friend Colette, who was on here last week, as another registered blind lady, who showed some sympathy towards Ash for the predicament. She too received a pile-in from these people with no consequences. The world is upside down, Phil. And this particular matter is just madness.
Yeah, it is, and he's a paedophile, this guy, and I'm ex-police, right, and I'm against the death penalty because I understand how easily that can be manipulated, how people can be played, and how justice can be, well, the law's an ass, as everybody's heard, but I know it can be an ass. But paedophiles, I don't believe, from what I've read, that rehabilitation is likely to succeed. From what I've understood, I think recycling would be better for everybody concerned, and I don't say that lightly, but because I really am against the death penalty in a civilized society. But certainly putting these people in women's prisons. I mean, Ash 49. Just read all of this out again. See when you go back. She who couldn't cross the road, a blind woman in Dundee, because the road markings were painted in these ridiculous colours. She's the one that got the pile-on and critiqued the GR bill, 155 amendments. How many is going to succeed? The key ones won't, and the spineless, chinless waste of spaces that the Scottish SNP MSPs will, for the most part, go along with. The amendment to prevent the convicted sex offenders obtaining GRC defeated. The Dolotowski situation, the Trans Awareness Week, the whole murder rates. We don't even need to comment on the above. Just read out that list to yourself, and it's patently obvious that this GRA woke movement is at odds with what the sensible majority want in life, and it ain't the persecution of the tiny trans minority. It's the protection of the female majority by not allowing self-ID and the push against regression and promotion of a civilized, balanced society. That's what we want. That's what we need. And we need to do something about it urgently.
Eva, one of the things that they say about, the most complex computers in the world, if you put in rubbish comes out. Now, the crime figures with these people who are on GRR certificates or self-declaring as women, this is going to skew crime figures. And from those crime figures, I would imagine, and you're a legal expert, I go back to again, our police forces and our law enforcement people form policies and whatnot from patterns of crime. But this is distorting completely and absolutely crime figures. Would I be right in that assessment?
Yes, indeed. It'll distort crime figures. It'll distort figures in relation to health, for example, where there are ongoing disputes about recording sex and gender. And we've all seen the rubbish about people with cervixes being invited for smear tests and the like. Gender neutral language is what we're supposed to be using, but it's positively dangerous. You get into the ridiculous realms of who should be called to get their prostate checked and what have you, and people wondering whether or not they've still got a prostate. You'll remember the Labour MP, what's his name, David Lammy, that was talking a while ago about whether trans women, that's men, have ovaries. I mean, it's utterly pathetic and ridiculous. In relation to the crime statistics, though, I think the police at the moment must be just as captured as any other public service, because we see that there are ongoing issues regarding which sex is authorised or permitted to search other sexes. So if you're male, you should not be searching a female and vice versa. But this comes into play if you've got a trans-identifying prisoner or a trans-identifying officer, because I understand that within the Scottish Police Service and the Scottish Prison Service, they don't yet have the very clear distinctions that have been made in England and Wales, where they still conduct themselves by way of biological sex, and they've said very plainly that a trans-identifying man, i.e. a trans woman, is not permitted to search a female. That needs to be said in Scotland too. Otherwise, we're going to have horrendous circumstances where a biological woman, a woman who's a prisoner, might become searched by a man because the man's trans-identifying. So these are very real issues that have a major impact on the lives of very many people. And, if I was lifted and I was going to get searched by a trans-identifying male, you're not on. But I end up remanded in custody because I refused to get searched by somebody that shouldn't be searching me in the first place. I don't think so. But that's where we're heading. We're going to have rapists recorded as female. That will happen. We know that there have been cases already where trans-identifying males have required to be addressed as female when they've been in court. Dolitovsky was referred to as female, both by the sheriff, by his lawyer, and in the context of the newspaper reports. He was repeatedly referred to as female. But he has, I suppose, the characteristic of gender reassignment because he claims that he's in the course of reassigning his gender, so he claims that he's entitled to that privilege. What a mess.
It is indeed. I mean, it's under 1% of the population, all this disruption, Yvonne. I was reading on what social media guy talking about, he went for an x-ray, a rugby player type guy, and they asked him if he could be pregnant before they took the x-ray, and he thought they were having a laugh. He said, was this April the 1st or something? He said, no, we've got to do it now so no one feels upset or hurt. We don't hurt feelings. It's nonsense, Yvonne, but it's creating havoc and it's destroying our society. And I'm not a religious freak, by the way, This is just absolutely destroying our society.
Well, it is. And it's also destroying our politics. I wonder how many people, I know of one in particular, who has left the SNP because he can't raise the issue of the GRA he can't be gender critical. It's not allowed in his branch. So there is no discussion. So he's left the SNP. And I'm just wondering how many people are just being turned away from politics because they think that we're all barking mad.
They'd be right.
And I remember reading a tweet by Craig Murray last year saying, why are people becoming obsessed with what other people are keeping in their underpants? And I suppose that's one way of looking at it, but it's killing political debate. It's killing politics. It's destroying democracy. And that's why we end up with useless bloody governments. That's why less than a quarter of the people in Linwood could be bothered to get off their backsides and go and bloody vote. Because they're looking at us and thinking we're all bonkers.
No, you're absolutely right, Yvonne. And Phil, while they're doing that, they're saying no. They're knocking back the amendment to prevent sexual assault to predators to get a GRR certificate. They're also got they put out to the public a paper about discussing doing away with juries for sexually related trials. This seems to be all part of it. Sex surveys at school, self-identification, removing gatekeeping. Now, no jury trials. We'll leave it to the judge to decide if someone's guilty or innocent. Now, there's a trial that we all know about and are thinking about right now. Our man would be in jail right now.
Yeah, and I think the SNP need to find out very, very soon that this is not acceptable. And it's gone beyond. We warned about the pernicious nature of this, but it's gone way, way, way beyond that. It's getting deadly, deadly serious, and the message has to go out to people. You can't back away from this. Fiona Roberts is a clown, an utter clown. Some of this ridiculous nonsense that coming out, and it will kill people, and people will be at risk, and it will be vulnerable people, and the pain grows, continues to swell, and unless these people are taken to account, bring them to account. Let's make sure they get the message, and that means we've got. And the tragedy is it's deliberate. It's destroying Scottish independence. We've been infiltrated. The SNP are broken, and it needs to be fixed, and it needs some major surgery. And we're the ones that are going to have to do it. We've got to get right in amongst them.
Eva, while the chap I referred to is getting asked if he's pregnant before an X-ray, and the nurses and porters are being asked to wear rainbow badges in the NHS, 100 health experts during this week wrote an open letter to the First Minister saying you need to do something about poverty. Going back to the beginning where we started this conversation, the health experts know that poverty is the problem, not men who want to wear lipstick. That's not the priority. Let's get the poverty sorted. If the health experts know it, why doesn't our First Minister know it?
See, what we need in Scotland is competent government, and it's what we don't have at the moment. We've said this before, that there are serious deficiencies basically in every department of the Scottish Government. And one of the real difficulties for Nicola Sturgeon is she has surrounded herself with people who will not challenge her authority and intellectually are probably inferior to her. And for that reason, she's able to mould them and shape them how she wishes. And that is not good for a functioning democracy. So in terms of what does Scotland need to progress, the government needs to listen to the evidence from experts, not only in relation to poverty, which I'll come on to, but also in connection with the justice system in Scotland. And in that regard, I would refer you to a very interesting interview that was in the Sunday Post last week. It's an interview of Frances McMenamin, KC, and she's the most qualified, most senior female member of the bar. And what she said was, she revealed a fear that Scotland's judicial system may soon, if proposals for judge-only trials go ahead, be on the verge of what she calls a misguided, dangerous misstep. In a wide-ranging interview, she voices grave concern on plans to abandon the jury system in sexual cases. She urges that more is done to defend women who have to give evidence in those trials, and she warns of what she calls the corrosive effect on justice caused by the poor pay of criminal lawyers in the legal profession. Now, this is a lady who has worked in the law since the 1970s, highly regarded, highly qualified, eminent in her profession. And if she's issuing these warnings publicly, there is something very seriously wrong at the heart of Scottish justice. And the First Minister, as an ex-lawyer, should know far better than to disregard the opinion of one so exalted. In relation to poverty, though, the point of your question, more than 100 experts on poverty, especially child poverty, wrote the open letter to the First Minister pointing out the deficiencies in her policies on tackling poverty. And what they said was the modest increase in the Scottish Child Payment was not enough. They go on in detail to give examples of what could be done to tackle poverty properly, but what they really want is a strategic direction, and a properly organised and managed, driven campaign where there is evidence taken from experts and expert opinion given as to how to tackle the very, very root causes of poverty, because we know that's down to things like expensive housing costs, poor quality housing, and more money going out than is coming in. And much of that now is obviously to do with fuel costs increasing and the issue in respect of inflation on food prices. So for 100 experts to tell the Scottish Government, you're not doing enough, here's the way to make it better, it's just another indication of the ineptitude of the Scottish Government in failing to tackle these things head on and failure to accept the advice from people who know best. There is a Poverty and Social Welfare Commission. It's been on the go for years, but you would hardly know about it. Shona Robson's part of it. I understand that some people have already resigned from it because it's not going fast enough, and it's not driven enough and not sufficiently radical to make a difference. But we need a poverty SAR, just as we need a women's health SAR, and we need people who are accountable, not voiceless, faceless committees that report periodically and nothing ever changes.
Caught me out there. I thought you were still going. I've got a wee drink of water. Well, it's gin and tonic, but everyone thinks it's water. No, we're running out of time, but there's a couple of things I want to cover before we go. And as I know, we're into extra time. As a football fan, Yvonne, we're into extra time now. We're playing, and it's on that. I'd like to quick question. It's the lack of, it's the optics of things. Sometimes the people who are held up as our betters, for want of a better word, they really just don't see the optics. And the one I'm going to talk about, we're talking about the World Cup. We could probably have a show on that. But the Prince of Wales, I repeat again his title, the Prince of Wales, goes to see the English team off and tells them, look, well, great to see you in the final. And well done, lads. There's pictures of him cuddling all the English players, which is fair enough, except he's the Prince of Wales. And the boys from Wales got on the plane with no one saying goodbye to them. They just don't even see, they're so, I don't know, arrogant. They don't see the optics and how they're offending people. It was a terrible thing to do.
It's shocking. I mean, Wales hasn't been in the World Cup since 1958.
Yeah.
And, more than 60 years. This is a huge deal for the people in Wales. And for that royal shrimp to turn round and say that, it just shows, he is as perfect for his job as Nicola Sturgeon is for her job. These people are not, they don't have their feet on the ground. They become so far removed from what the man in the street or the woman in the street is saying. And for him to go and say, oh, yeah, I'm supporting England, it's like, for God's sake, you royal fool, why the hell do you think you're called the Prince of Wales?
You would think.
I just despair at the stupidity. But I mean, let's face it, the Windsors aren't known for their academic prowess, are they? And so, yes,
Well, they're not. I saw another thing. Apparently, I don't know if you saw it, Prince Andrew has something like 100 cuddly toys on his bed that the maids have got to fix every day. Probably it's, if he was one of his girlfriends around here, take the cuddly toy home with you, love. I don't know. But anyway, they really are a lot. I'll be glad to see the back of them. Coming on the last couple of questions here, Phil, and one of them is, we recently, and I'd like to have spent more time on it, which is the G20 meeting in Bali, and they're all there, and the usual nonsense and guffaw comes out. But what I want to ask is, why is Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates there being treated like heads of state? These people from the WEF who want to reset the world. Why are they there? Why are they being treated like heads of state?
Yeah, well, the answer the answer is because they represent who's really in charge. That's why. I mean, Schwab's lying. Multipolarity is the normal state of being. Unipolarity has only been around since the wall came down. And the US, and more importantly, the people that run it, not the American people, have divided the world into those who do what the industrial capitalists want and those who don't. And they are devoid of principles, which is why the US globalists ally with ISIS, Ukrainian Nazis, Al-Qaeda, and anyone who serves their interests. And it's why we're in the trouble we're in. So no, these are the people that really control. So why wouldn't you kowtow to them?
Yeah. The other thing, Yvonne, before we go, if we're good little jockos and we go to the back of the bus and we squeezed and we doff our caps we're going to get 5 frigates. I don't know if it's the same 5 frigates we're going to get in 2014. This is a new 5 frigates. Meanwhile, they gave a 1.6 billion contract for naval shipbuilding to a Spanish consortium. What a load of piffle.
We've said it before and we'll say it again. We're accused of being too wee, too poor and too stupid, but we know that the first 2 are not in fact accurate. The third one is, if we actually continue to swallow this guff. On that note, hopefully Wednesday brings good news, but I think Wednesday's the 23rd of November, so it's the beginning of Saltire week.
Correct.
So 23rd to 30 November, everybody remember, fly your Saltire. If you haven't got a flag to fly in your garden, or you've not got a garden to fly it in, stick a Saltire sticker on your jersey or on your bag on your way to school or your work or on your bike or in the back of your car. Do what you can to let our country's flag be seen, and hopefully see as many of you as possible at the rallies on the 23rd. Make a loud noise for the benefit of the world, Westminster and Holyrood. Scotland's voice will be heard.
Indeed. And a last shout out for that is, many of you now, and I know a lot of you said to me on social media, I don't like this one, I don't like that one. It's important as many as possible turns out to these demonstrations throughout Scotland. From, they're up from Aberdeen down to the borders, they're everywhere. We've, as many as you can. Otherwise, they'll look and they'll say, you know what? They don't care, the jocks. They don't care, so stuff them. Let them just, to hell with them. So as many as possible, and as Eva's alluded to, the Saltires, get your Saltires out for a week, right up to St Andrew's night. And that's about us. There's still a couple of things we never get round to, folks. But hey, that's what Prism does. Thank you again for your input, my friends, and thank you for modelling our new gear there, our Yvonne. Yep.
Yes, I shall be wearing my my Prism hat in Selkirk Square, where there's a gathering on Wednesday. So if you see me and you're watching this, please come up and say hello. Because it would be interesting to know how many people tune into Prism, Roddy, because wherever I go now, people will come up and my husband's saying, how do you know all these people? What is Prism?
Yeah, well, we've got several thousand and it's growing all the time, which is great. And we're about to go into Spotify as well to grow the audience even more. So, ladies, gentlemen, I thank you. And to you out there and yours, please, please, please take care till we see you again. Bye now.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.